The letter arrived on a Tuesday morning in March of 1882, carried by the westbound stage through Buffalo, Wyoming, and delivered to Sarah, Whitmore's father's general store, with a stack of other mail that smelled of dust and distant places. Sarah was standing behind the counter, her dark hair pinned back against the late winter chill that still crept through the cracks in the wooden walls, when the postmaster handed her the bundle with a knowing wink that made her cheeks flush pink. "Got something for you today, Miss Sarah," he said, tapping the top envelope. "From that cowboy working the northern ranges." She waited until he left before sliding the letter from the pile, her fingers trembling slightly as she traced the unfamiliar handwriting that spelled her name across the front. Sarah Elizabeth Whitmore. The letters were careful, deliberate, as though the writer had taken great pains to make each one legible. She had never received a letter from a man before, not like this, not addressed to her alone with such formality and care. Her father was in the back room doing inventory, the sound of his counting a steady rhythm against the morning quiet. Sarah slipped the letter into her apron pocket and returned to arranging the newly arrived bolts of fabric, her heart beating faster than it should for such a simple thing as paper and ink. It had started 3 weeks earlier, when her father had mentioned needing help with a cattle drive come spring. A friend of his, a ranch owner up north near the Montana border, was looking for men willing to work hard for honest pay. Sarah had been sorting through correspondence that day, writing replies to suppliers and keeping the store's books in order, when she had impulsively suggested they place an advertisement in the territorial newspaper. Her father had agreed, dictating the words while she wrote them down in her neat, practiced hand. The responses had come slowly at first. Men looking for work were plentiful in Wyoming territory, but men who could read and write well enough to send a proper letter were less common. Most had simply shown up at the store, hats in hand, asking about the position in person. But one response had been different. Nathan Vance had written from a line camp 70 miles north, explaining that he was currently employed but would be free come April when the winter feeding ended. His letter had been articulate and respectful, asking pertinent questions about the work and the pay, and including a brief account of his experience with cattle and horses. What had struck Sarah most, though, was the postscript he had added at the bottom. "I apologize for the quality of this letter. I am writing by lamplight after a long day, and my hands are better suited to ropes and reins than pens." She had written back that same evening, her father's reply containing the necessary details about the work, but Sarah had added a separate note on a smaller piece of paper, tucked inside the fold. "Your letter was perfectly clear and well written. I hope the lamplight was kind to your eyes." His second letter had arrived a week later, and this time it was addressed solely to her. Now, standing in the quiet store with his third letter burning a hole in her pocket, Sarah found herself counting the hours until she could retreat to her room above the shop and read his words in private. The morning passed with excruciating slowness. Customers came and went, needing flour and sugar, nails and rope, all the mundane supplies that kept a frontier town running. She smiled and measured and calculated, her hands moving through familiar motions while her mind wandered north to places she had never seen. When the noon hour finally arrived and her father suggested she take her lunch upstairs, Sarah forced herself to walk slowly up the narrow staircase, her footsteps measured and calm. But once inside her small room with its simple bed and washstand, its window overlooking the main street of Buffalo, she tore open the envelope with uncharacteristic haste. The letter was longer than the previous ones, written across 3 pages in that same careful hand. He wrote about the work, about a late snow that had caught them unprepared and left the cattle restless and difficult. He described the mountains in winter, the way the wind carved patterns in the drifts, the silence that fell over the range when the storms passed through. And then, on the second page, he wrote something that made her breath catch in her throat. "I find myself thinking about your notes more than I should, Miss Whitmore. In the evenings, when the work is done and the other men are playing cards or sleeping, I read your words again and wonder about the woman who wrote them. You have a kindness in your writing that makes me believe you might be someone worth knowing. I hope that is not too forward of me to say." Sarah pressed the letter to her chest, her eyes closing as a smile spread across her face. She had never met Nathan Vance, had no idea what he looked like beyond the vague image she had constructed in her mind, tall and lean and weathered by outdoor work. But in that moment, sitting in her small room with his words in her hands, she felt something shift inside her chest. Something warm and bright and terrifying. She read the letter 3 more times before finally folding it carefully and placing it in the wooden box under her bed, where she kept her mother's few pieces of jewelry and the diary she had maintained since childhood. Then she pulled out a fresh sheet of paper and her good pen, the one with the mother-of-pearl handle her father had given her last Christmas, and began to write. "Dear Mr. Vance," she started, then paused, considering. Too formal, too distant. She crumpled the paper and started again. "Dear Nathan, I hope you will not think me too familiar for using your given name, but after 3 letters, Mr. Vance seems unnecessarily formal." The words flowed easier after that. She told him about Buffalo, about the store and her work there, about the way spring was starting to show itself in the gradually warming days, and the first green shoots appearing in the sheltered places along the creek. She told him about her mother, who had died 5 years earlier, and how she had taken over the running of the household and much of the store's correspondence. And then, because his honesty seemed to demand the same from her, she wrote, "I find myself watching for the stage each week, hoping for another letter from you. Your descriptions of the northern country make me wish I could see it myself, though I have lived in Buffalo all my life and rarely travel beyond the town limits. There is something in your writing that makes distant places feel near and familiar." She sealed the letter before she could second-guess herself and brought it downstairs, where her father was helping a rancher select new harness leather. "Letter for the northbound stage," she said, placing it on the outgoing mail pile. Her father glanced at it, noted the name, and gave her a long look that she could not quite interpret. "That Cowboy writes to you often," he observed. "He writes to us about the job," Sarah corrected, though they both knew the distinction was becoming blurred. "Sarah," her father said gently, and she heard the concern in his voice, "you have not even met this man." "I know," she said quietly, "but I feel like I know him anyway." "Is that foolish?" Her father was silent for a moment, his weathered hand still resting on the leather he had been examining. Finally, he said, "Your mother and I met at a church social. I knew within an hour of talking to her that I would marry her. Sometimes the heart knows things before the head catches up. Just be careful, daughter. Words on paper can hide as much as they reveal." "I will," Sarah promised, but as she returned to her work, she could not shake the feeling that Nathan Vance was not hiding anything. His letters felt like windows into an honest soul, and she found herself falling through them with increasing velocity. The correspondence continued through the rest of March and into early April. The letters grew longer, more personal. Nathan wrote about his childhood in Kansas, about losing his parents to cholera when he was 16 and making his way west alone. He wrote about learning the cattle trade from a rancher in Colorado who had given him his first real job, about the satisfaction of hard work and open spaces, about the loneliness that sometimes crept in during the long winters. Sarah shared her own stories in return. She wrote about her love of books, rare treasures in Buffalo that she borrowed from the few families who owned any. She wrote about her dreams of someday seeing the ocean, though she knew it was unlikely. She wrote about the responsibility she felt toward her father, who had never remarried and relied on her more than he probably should. By the time his letter arrived in mid-April saying he would be arriving in Buffalo on the 20th to discuss the cattle drive work, Sarah had filled nearly a quarter of her diary with thoughts about a man she had never seen. She knew it was excessive, possibly even dangerous, to invest so much feeling in someone she had only encountered through ink and paper. But when she reached the 12th page of his letters, carefully preserved in the box under her bed, she realized with startling clarity that she loved him. Not the wild, passionate love of dime novels, something quieter but deeper. She loved the way he saw the world, the gentleness mixed with strength in his words, the respect he showed her in every line. She loved the man she had come to know through his careful script and honest thoughts. The realization should have frightened her more than it did. Instead, she felt a strange calm settle over her as she prepared for his arrival. She pressed her best dress, a deep blue cotton that brought out the color of her eyes. She helped her father prepare the spare room above the store where Nathan would stay during his time in Buffalo. And she tried not to let her nervousness show as the 20th of April approached. He arrived on the afternoon stage, stepping down into the dusty street with a worn canvas bag and a black hat that had seen better days. Sarah watched from the store window, her heart hammering so hard she thought it might break through her ribs. He was tall, as she had imagined, with broad shoulders and the lean build of a man who worked hard for his living. His face was tanned and weather-worn, his dark hair slightly too long, curling over his collar. Her father went out to greet him, and Sarah watched them shake hands, watched her father gesture toward the store. When they started walking in her direction, she quickly moved away from the window and positioned herself behind the counter, her hands smoothing her apron in a nervous gesture she could not control. The door opened, the bell above it chiming sweetly. Sarah looked up, and her eyes met Nathan Vance's for the first time. He stopped in the doorway, frozen in a way that made her father glance between them curiously. Nathan's eyes were gray, she noticed, the color of storm clouds over the mountains. And they were looking at her with an expression of wonder that made her breath catch. "Miss Whitmore," he said, and his voice was deeper than she had imagined, rough around the edges but warm. "I would have known you anywhere." "Mr. Vance," she managed, though her voice came out softer than intended. "Welcome to Buffalo." He removed his hat, holding it in both hands, and crossed to the counter. Up close, she could see the small details she had wondered about, the scar above his left eyebrow, the laugh lines around his eyes, the way his hands, large and calloused, held his hat with surprising gentleness. "I have to confess something," Nathan said, his eyes never leaving hers. "I have been imagining this moment for weeks, and the reality is far better than anything I pictured." Sarah felt her cheeks flush, but she held his gaze. "I have been nervous about meeting you," she admitted, "afraid that the person I have come to know through letters might be different in life." "And?" he asked, and she heard the vulnerability beneath the question. "And I think I knew you already," she said simply. Her father cleared his throat, breaking the spell. "Well, Nathan, let me show you where you will be staying. We can discuss the cattle drive details over supper." But Nathan was still looking at Sarah, a slow smile spreading across his face that transformed his serious features into something approaching beautiful. "I look forward to it, sir, and perhaps Miss Whitmore would join us. I would very much like to hear about Buffalo from someone who knows it well." That evening, sitting around the small table in the living quarters above the store, Sarah listened to Nathan and her father discuss cattle and routes and timing, but her attention kept drifting to the man across from her. The way his hands moved when he talked. The way he listened carefully before responding. The way his eyes found hers every few minutes as if to confirm she was real. When her father excused himself to check the store's locks for the night, Nathan leaned forward slightly, his voice lowering. "I was terrified on that stage ride," he confessed. "Terrified that I had built you up in my mind into someone who could not possibly exist, or that you would take one look at me and regret every word you had written." "I could never regret those words," Sarah said firmly. "They were true when I wrote them, and they are true now." "I love you," Nathan said, the words rushing out as if he could not contain them any longer. "I know it is too soon to say so, and we have only just met properly, but I have loved you since your third letter when you told me about reading by candlelight and dreaming of oceans. I loved you by the time I had read 12 pages of your words, and nothing I have seen today has changed that. Only made it stronger." Sarah reached across the table, her hand finding his. His fingers closed around hers, warm and solid and real. "I loved you by the 12th page too," she whispered. "I counted them in my diary, 12 pages, and my heart was yours." They sat like that, hands joined across the table until her father returned and politely suggested it was getting late. Nathan stood reluctantly, still holding her hand for a moment longer before releasing it. "Tomorrow?" he asked. "Tomorrow," she confirmed. "And every day after if you wish it." "I wish it more than anything," he said, and the truth of it shone in his gray eyes. The next weeks passed in a blur of work and stolen moments. Nathan helped prepare for the cattle drive, purchasing supplies and checking equipment, but every spare minute was spent with Sarah. They walked along the creek in the evenings, talking until the stars came out. They sat in the store during quiet afternoon hours, and he read to her from the newspaper while she mended shirts. They fell into an easy rhythm that felt like they had known each other for years instead of weeks. Her father watched them with a mixture of amusement and resignation, finally pulling Sarah aside one evening to say, "I suppose I should not be surprised. Your mother always said you would know your own mind when it came to love. He is a good man, Sarah. I can see that, but this is moving fast." "I know," Sarah said, "but it does not feel fast. It feels like coming home." Nathan proposed 3 weeks after arriving in Buffalo, on a warm May evening with the sun setting over the Bighorn Mountains. They were sitting on the bench outside the store, and he turned to her with that serious expression she had come to love. "I have nothing to offer you but hard work and an uncertain future," he said. "I am just a cowboy with some savings and a lot of hope. But I love you more than I thought it possible to love anyone, and I promise I will spend every day trying to be worthy of you. Will you marry me, Sarah Whitmore?" She did not hesitate. "Yes," she said, and kissed him there on the bench, not caring who might see. They married in June, in the small church at the edge of Buffalo with half the town in attendance. Sarah wore a dress of cream-colored silk that had belonged to her mother, altered to fit her smaller frame. Nathan wore a new suit purchased specially for the occasion, though he looked slightly uncomfortable in the formal clothing. But when he saw her walking down the aisle, his expression transformed into such pure joy that several of the older women in the congregation had to dab at their eyes. The ceremony was simple and sweet. They exchanged vows in voices that shook slightly with emotion, and when the minister pronounced them husband and wife, Nathan kissed her with a tenderness that made her forget they were standing in front of a church full of people. The reception was held in the town hall, with music and dancing and food contributed by neighbors and friends. Sarah danced with her father, who told her he was proud of her and happy for her, even though he would miss her terribly. She danced with Nathan until her feet ached, laughing as he apologized for his lack of dancing skill. "I can ride a horse and rope a steer," he said ruefully, "but I was never taught to waltz." "You are doing fine," she assured him, her head resting against his chest where she could hear the steady beat of his heart. As the evening wound down and guests began to depart, Nathan leaned down to whisper in her ear, "Are you ready to go home, Mrs. Vance, Mrs. Vance?" The name sent a thrill through her that had nothing to do with the warm June night. "Yes," she said simply. They had rented a small house on the outskirts of Buffalo, a two-room cabin that was modest but clean, with a view of the mountains and enough land for a vegetable garden and a few chickens. Nathan had spent the past week making it ready, adding a new stove and repairing the roof, building shelves for her books and a proper bed frame to replace the old rope mattress. He carried her over the threshold, and she laughed at the tradition even as she loved him for honoring it. Inside, lamplight glowed warmly, and she saw that he had picked wildflowers and placed them in a jar on the table. "It is not much," Nathan said, setting her down gently, "but it is ours." "It is perfect," Sarah said and meant it. She had lived above her father's store all her life, in rooms that were comfortable but never truly hers. This small cabin, with its rough wooden walls and simple furnishings, felt more like home than anywhere she had ever been. That night, lying in Nathan's arms in their new bed, listening to the sounds of the Wyoming night outside their window, Sarah thought about the strange path that had brought them here. A letter. Words on paper. A connection formed across distance through nothing more than ink and honesty. "What are you thinking?" Nathan asked, his fingers tracing lazy patterns on her shoulder. "I am thinking about your first letter," she said. "How you apologized for writing by lamplight, how you had no idea what those words would mean to me." "I almost did not send it," he admitted. "I thought it was presumptuous to write to a woman I had never met, but I could not help myself. There was something about knowing you had written the advertisement, that your hand had formed those words. I wanted to write to that person." "I am glad you did," Sarah said softly. "I am glad you were brave enough to send that letter." "I am glad you were brave enough to answer it," he replied. "I love you, Sarah Vance, my wife." "I love you too," she whispered, and kissed him in the lamplight, sealing a promise that had begun with letters and would last a lifetime. The summer passed in a haze of happiness. Nathan took a position at a ranch 10 miles north of Buffalo, working as a foreman and earning enough to support them comfortably. Sarah continued helping at her father's store several days a week, enjoying the work and the connection to town life. But her favorite times were the evenings, when Nathan came home dusty and tired, and she could feed him supper and listen to stories about his day. They learned each other in those months, the way all newlyweds do. She learned that he was an early riser who liked to watch the sunrise while drinking his coffee. He learned that she hummed when she was concentrating on a task. She learned that he had a dry sense of humor that caught her by surprise. He learned that she had strong opinions about books and politics, and was not afraid to express them. They had their first real argument in August, about whether to spend their savings on a new horse for Nathan or new windows for the cabin. Sarah wanted the windows, arguing that the old ones let in too much cold air and would be a problem come winter. Nathan wanted the horse, saying it would help him do his job better and potentially earn more money. They both made their cases passionately, and then Nathan had stormed out to the barn to cool off. Sarah sat at the table, fuming, until she realized how ridiculous they were being. She went out to the barn and found him brushing down their old mare with more force than necessary. "We should get the windows," he said without looking up. "You are right, we live here, you should be comfortable." "We should get the horse," Sarah countered. "You are right, Your work is important and you need proper equipment." He stopped brushing and turned to look at her. "Are we going to argue about who gets to give in?" Despite herself, Sarah laughed. "Apparently." Nathan crossed to her, pulling her into his arms. "How about this? We save a little longer and get both. It will take a few more months, but we can do it." "That is a sensible compromise," Sarah admitted, her face pressed against his chest. "I am sorry I got angry," he said into her hair. "I am not used to having someone to discuss these things with. I have made my own decisions for so long." "I am sorry too," she said. "We will learn together. How to be married, how to disagree without hurting each other." "I like that," Nathan said, pulling back to look at her. "Learning together." By the time winter arrived, they had both the new windows and the new horse, and the cabin was cozy and warm against the Wyoming cold. Sarah had planted a winter garden that provided fresh vegetables, and Nathan had built a proper chicken coop that protected their small flock from predators. They had settled into a comfortable routine, a life that felt solid and real and good. Christmas came, and they celebrated quietly at home, exchanging simple gifts. Sarah had made Nathan a new shirt, carefully stitching it by lamplight over many evenings. Nathan had commissioned a local carpenter to build Sarah a proper writing desk with small drawers for her papers and pens. "So you can write more letters," he said as she ran her hands over the smooth wood, admiring the craftsmanship. "Maybe to me when I have to travel for work." "I will always write to you," Sarah promised, "even when you are only gone for a day." They made love that night in front of the fireplace, the only light coming from the flames, and Sarah thought she had never been so happy. This life they were building together, simple and honest and full of love, was more than she had ever dreamed possible. In February, Sarah realized she was pregnant. She had suspected for a few weeks, the subtle changes in her body familiar from helping attend births in town, but she waited to be certain before telling Nathan. When she finally shared the news over breakfast on a cold Saturday morning, he went completely still, his fork halfway to his mouth. "Truly?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "Truly," she confirmed, watching his face carefully. He set down his fork slowly, then came around the table and pulled her to her feet, holding her as gently as if she were made of glass. "A baby," he said, wonder filling his voice. "We are going to have a baby." "In September, I think," Sarah said, laughing as he spun her carefully in a circle. "Are you happy?" "Happy." He set her down and cupped her face in his hands, his gray eyes bright with unshed tears. "Sarah, I am beyond happy. I am terrified and amazed and more grateful than I know how to express. A family, our family. The pregnancy was not easy." Sarah suffered from terrible sickness in the early months, unable to keep down much more than dry toast and weak tea. Nathan hovered anxiously, trying to help while feeling helpless, finally convincing her father to spare her from the store work until she felt better. By late spring, the sickness had passed, and Sarah bloomed with health and energy. She spent her days preparing the cabin for the baby, washing and sewing tiny clothes, setting up a cradle that Nathan had built with his own hands. He had carved it from pine, smooth and sturdy, with her initials and his intertwined on the headboard. Summer arrived hot and dry, and Sarah grew large and uncomfortable in the heat. Nathan insisted she rest in the afternoons, bringing her cool drinks and fanning her with a piece of stiff paper when the temperature became unbearable. They spent the evenings on the porch, watching the sun set over the mountains, talking about names and futures and all the things they would teach their child. "I want our children to know they are loved," Nathan said one evening, his hand resting on Sarah's swollen belly. "I want them to feel safe and valued, the way I never did after my parents died." "They will know," Sarah assured him. "We will make sure of it, every single day. The baby came early, on a September morning when the air was just starting to turn cool with the promise of autumn. Sarah woke to the first pains just after dawn, and Nathan immediately rode to fetch the midwife from town. By the time they returned, Sarah's water had broken, and the contractions were coming hard and fast. The labor lasted 12 hours, long and difficult and frightening at times. Nathan stayed with her throughout, holding her hand and whispering encouragement, ignoring the midwife's suggestion that he wait outside. When their son finally emerged, red-faced and screaming, Nathan wept openly. "A boy," the midwife announced, placing the baby on Sarah's chest. "A healthy boy with good lungs." Sarah looked down at her son, at his tiny perfect fingers and the dark hair plastered to his small head, and felt a love so fierce it took her breath away. "Hello, little one," she whispered. "We have been waiting for you." Nathan leaned over them both, his hand trembling as he touched his son's cheek. "He is perfect," he said hoarsely. "Sarah, he is perfect." They named him James after Nathan's father, with the middle name Henry after Sarah's. James Henry Vance, born September 12, 1883, weighing 7 pounds and bellowing his displeasure at the world with impressive volume. The first weeks were exhausting. James was a demanding baby who needed to eat constantly, and seemed to have strong opinions about everything from the temperature of his bath to the way he was swaddled. Sarah, recovering from the birth and learning to nurse, felt overwhelmed more often than she wanted to admit. Nathan was patient and helpful, taking over the household tasks and walking James for hours when he was fussy, singing to him in a low, off-key voice that somehow soothed the baby when nothing else would. Sarah would wake in the night to find Nathan standing by the window with James in his arms, both of them silhouetted against the moonlight, and her heart would swell with love for both of them. "You are a natural father," she told him one morning, watching him change James's diaper with practiced efficiency. "I am making it up as I go," Nathan admitted. "But I love him so much it scares me. Is that normal?" "I think so," Sarah said. "I feel the same way. Like my heart is walking around outside my body now, vulnerable to every danger." "We will protect him," Nathan said firmly. "We will give him the best life we can." They fell into a new routine, adjusting to life as parents. Sarah gradually regained her strength, and James settled into a somewhat predictable pattern of eating and sleeping. By the time winter arrived, they felt like they had figured out the basics, though James continued to surprise them with new developments and demands. Sarah returned to helping at the store part-time, bringing James with her and setting up a basket behind the counter where he could sleep or play. Customers loved seeing the baby, and her father doted on his grandson with unabashed adoration. Nathan had been promoted to assistant manager at the ranch, a position that came with more responsibility, but also better pay and the promise of future advancement. He was respected by the other ranch hands for his fair treatment and hard work, and the owner had mentioned the possibility of Nathan eventually running his own operation someday. Life was good, if exhausting. They had less time for just the two of them, but the moments they did steal felt precious. Late at night, after James was finally asleep, they would sit together on the porch or in front of the fire, holding hands and talking quietly about their days, their dreams, their son. "You ever regret it?" Sarah asked one night when James had been particularly fussy and neither of them had slept more than a few hours. The letters, the quick marriage, all of it. Nathan looked at her like she had asked if the sun might not rise tomorrow. "Not for a single second," he said firmly. "This life with you and James is more than I ever thought I would have. Every difficult night, every worry, every challenge is worth it because I am facing it with you." "I love you," Sarah said, leaning her head on his shoulder. "Even when I am so tired I can barely see straight, I love you." "I love you too," he replied, kissing the top of her head. "Always." The years passed, marked by the small milestones of family life. James took his first steps on a warm June day, tottering between Sarah and Nathan with a look of fierce concentration on his face. He spoke his first words shortly after his first birthday, a clear papa that made Nathan beam with pride. He grew into a sturdy, curious toddler who loved horses and dogs and getting into everything he should not touch. In the spring of 1885, Sarah discovered she was pregnant again. This time, the pregnancy was easier, her body knowing what to expect. She continued her normal activities well into her 7th month, only slowing down when Nathan insisted, worried about her doing too much. Their daughter was born in December, during a snowstorm that left drifts 3 feet high outside the cabin. The midwife almost did not make it in time, and Nathan had to help deliver the baby himself, with Sarah guiding him through the process between contractions. Catherine Rose Vance arrived in her father's hands, and Nathan later said it was the most terrifying and amazing experience of his life. "I thought James's birth was something," he told Sarah afterward, cradling his daughter while Sarah rested. "But this, helping bring her into the world, holding her the moment she took her first breath, I will never forget it." Catherine was a calmer baby than James had been, content to watch the world with wide blue eyes and only crying when she had a specific need. James was fascinated by his baby sister, wanting to help with everything and frequently bringing her his toys as offerings. The cabin, which had felt spacious when it was just the two of them, now seemed crowded with 2 active children. Nathan began making plans to add on a room, drawing sketches in the evenings and calculating costs. By the following summer, he had saved enough to hire a carpenter, and they added a proper bedroom for the children, giving Sarah and Nathan their room back. Sarah's father, now in his 60s, began to talk about retiring and passing the store to someone younger. "You and Nathan should take it over," he suggested one day, bouncing Catherine on his knee while James played with wooden blocks nearby. "You already help run it, and Nathan has the head for business. I could teach him the rest." Sarah discussed it with Nathan that night after the children were in bed. They sat at the kitchen table, and she could see him turning the idea over in his mind, examining it from every angle. "It would mean giving up ranch work," he said slowly. "But it would also mean steadier hours, being home every night, less danger, and there is potential there. Buffalo is growing. A well-run general store could do very well." "You would miss the cattle work," Sarah observed. "Maybe," Nathan admitted. "But I would not miss the long days away from you and the children. I would not miss worrying about getting hurt and leaving you without support. And I like the idea of building something that we could pass down to James and Catherine someday." They decided to accept her father's offer. The transition took several months, with Nathan learning the intricacies of inventory and suppliers while still working part-time at the ranch. By the spring of 1887, he was running the store full-time, and Sarah's father had officially retired to a small house they helped him purchase near the edge of town. The store thrived under Nathan's management. He had a knack for understanding what people needed and making sure it was in stock, and his fair prices and honest dealing earned him loyalty from ranchers and townspeople alike. Sarah continued handling the correspondence and bookkeeping, their partnership extending seamlessly into business as it had into marriage and parenthood. In 1888, when James was 5 and Catherine was 3, Sarah discovered she was pregnant for the 3rd time. This pregnancy was the hardest, complicated by fatigue and swelling that worried the doctor. Nathan insisted she rest completely, taking over her duties at the store and hiring a girl from town to help with the children and housework. "I feel useless," Sarah complained one afternoon, lying on the sofa while the hired girl played with Catherine in the yard and James was at the new schoolhouse in town. "You are growing our child," Nathan said firmly, sitting beside her and taking her hand. "That is not useless. That is everything." The baby, another boy they named Thomas William, was born in February of 1889. The delivery was difficult and long, and for a few terrifying hours, the doctor was not sure Sarah would survive the blood loss. But she pulled through, weak but determined, and Thomas, despite the difficult birth, was healthy and strong. "No more," Nathan said, holding her hand while she recovered, his face pale with remembered fear. "I cannot risk losing you, Sarah. 3 children is enough, more than enough." "Agreed," Sarah said weakly but with feeling. 3 is perfect." Thomas was a happy baby who smiled early and often, seeming to find joy in everything around him. James took his role as big brother seriously, helping watch over both younger siblings with a protectiveness that made Sarah's heart melt. Catherine, no longer the baby, adjusted to having a little brother with grace, often singing to him or bringing him toys when he cried. The 1890s brought change to Buffalo and to their family. The town grew steadily as the railroad brought more settlers and commerce. The store expanded, and Nathan hired 2 full-time clerks to help manage the increased business. They were prospering in a way Sarah had never imagined possible, able to provide comforts for their children that had been luxuries in her own childhood. James started school and proved to be a bright student who loved reading, inheriting his mother's passion for books. Catherine was artistic, always drawing or making things with whatever material she could find. Thomas, as he grew from baby to toddler, showed signs of having his father's way with animals, fearless around horses and gentle with every dog or cat that crossed his path. In 1892, Sarah's father passed away peacefully in his sleep at the age of 68. Sarah grieved deeply for the man who had raised her alone after her mother's death, who had supported her unconventional romance with a cowboy she had never met, who had lived to see his grandchildren grow. Nathan held her through the worst of the grief, and the children, sensing their mother's sadness, were extra gentle and loving. "He was a good man," Nathan said at the funeral, standing with Sarah at the graveside while their children held each other's hands nearby. "He gave me you, which makes him the best man I ever knew. He loved you like a son," Sarah said, tears streaming down her face. "He told me once that he could not have chosen better for me if he had tried." Life continued as it always does. The store kept them busy and prosperous. The children grew and changed, developing their own personalities and dreams. James, at 13, talked about maybe becoming a teacher someday. Catherine, at 11, was already selling her drawings to neighbors and saving the money in a jar. Thomas, at 8, spent every spare moment at the livery stable, learning about horses. Sarah and Nathan, now in their late 30s, had grown into their marriage like 2 trees whose roots had tangled together underground, supporting each other invisibly but fundamentally. They still wrote each other notes sometimes, little messages left where the other would find them, a continuation of the correspondence that had started everything. One evening in the spring of 1895, Sarah found a letter on her pillow. She opened it curiously, recognizing Nathan's handwriting immediately. Inside, he had written, "My dearest Sarah, I was thinking today about the first letter I sent you 13 years ago. How nervous I was, how afraid you would not answer, how miraculous it seemed when you did. I have written many letters in my life, but those letters to you before we met were the most important words I have ever set to paper. They brought me you, and you brought me everything else. I love you more today than I did when I wrote that first nervous letter, and I will love you more tomorrow than I do today. Forever yours, Nathan. Sarah sat on the bed, the letter in her hands, tears of happiness streaming down her face. She could hear Nathan downstairs, talking to the children about closing up the store for the night. In a moment, he would come upstairs, and she would show him the letter and tell him she loved him, as she had done thousands of times over the years. But for now, she sat with his words, remembering the girl she had been when the first letter arrived. How young and hopeful and terrified. How she had fallen in love with words on a page before she ever saw the man who wrote them. How by the 12th page of his letters, her heart had known what her head was still trying to process. She had been right to trust that feeling. The love that had begun with ink and paper had grown into something real and solid and lasting. It had survived the challenges of marriage and parenthood, of loss and worry and the everyday struggles of life. It had been tested and proven true again and again. Nathan came upstairs, and his face softened when he saw her holding the letter. "Did you find it?" he asked. "I did," Sarah said, standing and crossing to him. "And I love it, I love you." "I love you too," he said, pulling her close. "Always have, always will." They stood like that for a long moment, holding each other in the quiet evening light, while downstairs their children laughed about something, and the store settled into its nightly silence. This was their life, built on a foundation of letters and trust and love. And it was everything Sarah had ever wanted. The years continued to pass, bringing both joys and challenges. In 1897, James finished school at the top of his class and surprised everyone by announcing he wanted to attend the new teachers' college in Laramie. Sarah and Nathan were supportive, proud of their son's ambition even as they worried about him leaving home. They saved carefully to afford the tuition, and in the fall of 1898, they put their 18-year-old son on the train south with a trunk full of clothes and books and hearts full of pride and fear. Catherine, at 16, had become a talented artist whose work was gaining recognition beyond Buffalo. A gallery owner passing through town had seen her paintings and offered to display them in Cheyenne, and she had sold 3 pieces for more money than she had ever imagined. She talked about maybe moving to a bigger city someday to study art formally, but for now, she was content helping at the store and painting in her spare time. Thomas, at 14, was working part-time at the livery stable and talking about becoming a rancher. He had his father's love of outdoor work and his mother's head for business, a combination Nathan said would serve him well in whatever he chose to do. Sarah, now 41, sometimes felt the weight of the years in her bones, especially on cold mornings when old aches made themselves known. But she was healthy and active, still managing much of the store's business and serving on the town council that Buffalo had formed as it grew toward official city status. Nathan, at 43, had some gray in his dark hair and more lines around his eyes, but he was still strong and vital, respected throughout the county as a fair businessman and good man. He had been asked to run for mayor several times and always declined, saying he was content with his store and his family. In the summer of 1900, James returned home for a visit, bringing with him a young woman named Elizabeth whom he introduced as his fiancée. Sarah liked her immediately, recognizing in Elizabeth the same intelligence and kindness she saw in her son. The wedding was planned for the following spring, and Sarah threw herself into the preparations with joy, even as she marveled at how quickly time had passed. "Our son is getting married," she said to Nathan one night, lying in bed and staring at the ceiling. "How did that happen? Was he not just learning to walk yesterday? I know, Nathan said, pulling her close. Sometimes I still see him as that red-faced baby screaming in the midwife's arms. Now he is a man, starting his own life. It is strange and wonderful and terrifying. We are going to be grandparents someday, Sarah realized aloud. Nathan laughed, a warm sound in the darkness. That thought is even stranger, but I suppose it is the natural way of things. We build a life, raise children, and they go build their own lives. The cycle continues. I am glad I built mine with you, Sarah said softly. Me too, Nathan replied. Best decision I ever made writing that letter. Best decision I ever made answering it, Sarah countered. They lay in comfortable silence for a while, listening to the night sounds outside their window. The house was quiet with only Thomas still at home, Catherine having moved into rooms above the store for more space to work on her art. The emptying nest felt both sad and right, a natural progression. Do you ever think about what might have been? Sarah asked. If you had not written, if I had not answered. Sometimes, Nathan admitted, but only to appreciate what we have more. I could have been a lonely old cowboy, drifting from ranch to ranch with nothing to show for my years but scars and stories. Instead, I have you and our children and a life full of love and purpose. I won the lottery when you wrote back to me, Sarah Vance. We both won, Sarah said, kissing him in the darkness. James's wedding in the spring of 1901 was a joyous affair, held in the same church where Sarah and Nathan had married nearly 20 years earlier. Sarah cried through the ceremony, watching her firstborn exchange vows with his beloved, seeing Nathan's protective love in the way James held Elizabeth's hand. At the reception, Nathan pulled Sarah onto the dance floor and they moved together with the ease of long practice, his dancing much improved from their own wedding day. We did well, Nathan said, looking over at James and Elizabeth laughing with friends. He is a good man. We raised a good man. We did, Sarah agreed. All three of them. Good, kind, strong people. We should be proud. I am, Nathan said. Proud of them, proud of us, proud of everything we have built together. The new century brought continued prosperity to Buffalo and to the Vance family. The store became one of the most successful businesses in town, and Nathan opened a second location on the other side of Buffalo's growing downtown. Thomas, after finishing school, decided to work with his father rather than pursue ranching, showing an aptitude for business that delighted Nathan. Catherine moved to Denver in 1900, and to study at an art academy. And though Sarah missed her daughter terribly, she was proud of Catherine's courage in pursuing her dreams. Letters arrived regularly from Denver, full of descriptions of city life and artistic techniques, and Sarah wrote back with news from Buffalo and encouragement for her daughter's studies. In 1903, James and Elizabeth had a baby girl, making Sarah and Nathan grandparents for the first time. Little Emma was born in Laramie, and Sarah made the trip south to help Elizabeth during the first difficult weeks of motherhood, remembering her own struggles with James and grateful to be able to help her daughter-in-law through the same challenges. Holding her granddaughter for the first time, Sarah was overwhelmed by the miracle of it all. This tiny person was the continuation of the love story that had begun with letters, the next chapter in a book that just kept getting better. What do you think? James asked, watching his mother cradle his daughter with expert hands. I think she is perfect, Sarah said honestly. And I think you and Elizabeth are going to be wonderful parents. Being a parent is the hardest thing you will ever do and the best. Cherish every moment, even the difficult ones, because it goes so fast. You sound like you have experience, James teased gently. A little, Sarah agreed, smiling. 23 years of it now, and I would not trade a single day, not even the ones where you tested every ounce of patience I had." She returned to Buffalo after 2 weeks, and Nathan met her at the station, pulling her into his arms despite the crowd of people around them. "I missed you," he said into her hair. "I was only gone 2 weeks," Sarah pointed out, though she had missed him terribly too. 2 weeks is a long time when you are used to someone being beside you every night for 21 years, Nathan said. "The bed was cold without you." "Well, I am home now," Sarah said, linking her arm through his as they walked toward the wagon. "And we are grandparents. Can you believe it?" "Barely," Nathan admitted. "But it suits us, I think. We have earned the gray hair and the right to spoil grandchildren." Catherine returned to Buffalo in 1904, her studies complete and a portfolio full of remarkable work. She opened a small studio downtown, teaching art to children and selling her paintings to the steady stream of visitors that Buffalo now received. She had grown into a confident, talented woman, and Sarah could not have been prouder. Thomas, at 21, had become Nathan's right-hand man at the stores, showing the same combination of integrity and business sense that had made his father successful. He was courting a rancher's daughter from a spread east of town, and Sarah suspected another wedding would be in their future soon. Life settled into a comfortable rhythm. The children were launched into their own lives, but still close, still connected. Sarah and Nathan, now in their late 40s, had reached a stage where they could enjoy the fruits of their years of hard work. They took time to travel occasionally, visiting Laramie to see James and his growing family, or taking the train to Denver to see Catherine's latest exhibition. But they were always glad to return to Buffalo, to the life they had built there. The house they had expanded over the years was comfortable and full of memories. The stores were prospering. Their children were happy and healthy. And they had each other, still as much in love as they had been when letters were their only connection. On their 25th wedding anniversary in 1908, Nathan planned a surprise party at the town hall, inviting everyone they knew in Buffalo. Sarah walked in thinking they were attending a regular community dance, and found herself facing a room full of friends and family celebrating their quarter-century of marriage. "You are sneaky," she told Nathan, laughing and crying at the same time. "I had help," he admitted, gesturing to their children, all three of whom had returned to Buffalo for the occasion. James had brought Elizabeth and their 2 children, Emma now 5 and a baby boy named Robert. Catherine had brought a young man she introduced as her beau, a fellow artist from Denver. Thomas had brought his new wife Clara, whom he had married in a small ceremony 6 months earlier. The party was joyful and loud, full of laughter and stories and dancing. People stood up to make toasts, sharing memories of Sarah and Nathan over the years. The mayor spoke about Nathan's contributions to Buffalo's growth. The head of the Ladies' Auxiliary praised Sarah's charitable work. Their children told embarrassing and sweet stories that had everyone laughing and crying. When it was finally their turn to speak, Nathan stood with Sarah's hand in his and looked out at the assembled crowd. 25 years ago, he said, his voice carrying easily through the room, I wrote a letter to a woman I had never met. It was the bravest thing I had ever done, putting my thoughts on paper and sending them off to a stranger. When she wrote back, when her kindness and intelligence shone through her words, I fell in love. By the time I reached the 12th page of her letters, I knew I wanted to spend my life with her. He turned to look at Sarah, his gray eyes soft with love. I was right. These 25 years with Sarah have been the best of my life. She has given me 3 remarkable children, a home full of love, a partnership in every sense of the word. She has made me better than I could have been alone. And I look forward to the next 25 years and all the years after that, because every day with her is a gift." Sarah stood, her own eyes wet with tears, and kissed him in front of everyone. The crowd cheered, and someone started playing a waltz, and they danced together in the center of the room, moving in perfect synchronization. Two people who had learned each other so well that they moved as one. Later, when the party had wound down and they were home alone, Sarah and Nathan sat on their porch watching the stars come out over the mountains. "Thank you for tonight," Sarah said. "It was perfect." "You are perfect," Nathan replied. "Well, not perfect. You leave books everywhere and you hum off-key when you cook, but you are perfect for me. You are terrible at remembering birthdays and you snore when you sleep on your back," Sarah countered, "but you are perfect for me too." They sat in companionable silence, holding hands, comfortable in the way only people who have spent decades together can be. "Do you ever regret answering that first letter?" Nathan asked, echoing Sarah's question from years before. "Never," Sarah said firmly. "Not once. You gave me everything I ever wanted and things I did not even know to want. You gave me love and family and adventure in the everyday. You gave me a life worth living." "The feeling is entirely mutual," Nathan said. "I love you, Sarah Vance, today, tomorrow, and for all the years we have left." "I love you too," Sarah said, leaning her head on his shoulder and watching the stars wheel overhead. "My cowboy, my love, my heart." The years after their 25th anniversary continued to bring change and growth. James became the principal of the school in Laramie, respected for his fairness and innovative teaching methods. Elizabeth gave birth to their third child, a girl they named Sarah after her grandmother, and Sarah the elder cried when she heard the news. Catherine married her artist beau in a bohemian ceremony in Denver that scandalized some of Buffalo's more traditional residents, but delighted Sarah and Nathan, who saw their daughter's joy and knew it was right. Catherine and her husband, Michael, opened a gallery together in Denver that quickly became known for showcasing talented Western artists. Thomas and Clara took over the day-to-day management of both stores as Nathan gradually stepped back from the demanding work. They proved to be excellent managers, modernizing the inventory systems and expanding the product lines. Clara became pregnant in 1910, and when she gave birth to twins, a boy and a girl, the Vance family grew by two more in a single day. Sarah, now in her early 50s, had officially become the matriarch of a growing family. She had 7 grandchildren and more on the way, and she loved every chaotic moment of family gatherings. Her hair had gone mostly gray, though Nathan insisted it made her more beautiful, not less. Her hands, which had written those first fateful letters decades ago, now wrote to grandchildren and friends scattered across Wyoming and beyond. Nathan, in his mid-50s, had retired from active management of the stores but served on several boards and committees in Buffalo. He had become one of the town's elder statesmen, the kind of person people came to for advice and wisdom. His gray hair and weathered face gave him a distinguished air, though Sarah could still see the young cowboy who had written nervous letters by lamplight when she looked at him. In 1912, on a warm June evening 30 years after they had first met, Sarah and Nathan sat on their porch and watched the sunset paint the mountains gold and purple. Their children were all launched and happy. Their grandchildren were healthy and growing. The stores were thriving under Thomas's management. Life was good, better than good. 30 years, Sarah said, marveling at the number. It feels like yesterday and like forever at the same time. I know what you mean, Nathan agreed. I can still remember the first time I saw you, standing behind that counter looking terrified and hopeful. I knew in that instant that every word I had written was true, that I loved you and would always love you. I was so nervous, Sarah admitted. What if you had been disappointed? What if the reality could not match what we had built in letters? Impossible, Nathan said firmly. You exceeded every expectation, every dream. You were better than the woman I had imagined because you were real. We were lucky, Sarah said. So many things could have gone wrong. But they went right, we went right. Not luck, Nathan disagreed gently. Choice. We chose each other again and again. Through difficulties and disagreements, through challenges and changes, we kept choosing each other. Sarah turned to look at him, this man who had been her partner for 3 decades, and felt the same surge of love she had felt reading his 12th page all those years ago. I would choose you again, she said. Every time, in every lifetime. And I would choose you, Nathan replied, taking her hand and bringing it to his lips. My Sarah, my love, my life. They sat together as the stars began to emerge, as they had done thousands of times before and would do thousands of times more. The letters that had brought them together were stored carefully in a box in Sarah's closet, yellowed with age but still legible, still precious. Sometimes she took them out and read them, remembering the young woman who had fallen in love with words on a page, who had been brave enough to trust her heart. Those letters had been the foundation of everything else. The love they declared had proven true and lasting, growing deeper and stronger with every passing year. The promises they implied had all been kept, and the life they had imagined, built on hope and honesty and connection, had become real. Sarah Vance, née Whitmore, had loved Nathan Vance by the 12th page of his letters before she ever saw his face. That love had been tested by time and circumstance, and the everyday challenges of building a life together. And it had survived it all, thriving like a tree planted in good soil, roots deep and strong, branches reaching toward the sky. This was their story, begun with ink and paper, written across decades in moments both ordinary and extraordinary. A cowboy and a storekeeper's daughter, letters and love. A simple beginning that had bloomed into something rich and full and beautiful. And as the stars wheeled overhead and the mountains stood eternal in the distance, Sarah and Nathan sat together on their porch, hands joined, hearts entwined, living proof that sometimes the bravest thing you can do is write a letter to a stranger and hope they write back. Their golden years passed peacefully in Buffalo. The town continued to grow and modernize, bringing electricity and telephones and automobiles, changes that Nathan found amusing and Sarah found fascinating. They adapted as needed but kept their routines, their rituals of morning coffee together and evening walks when weather permitted. In 1915, they celebrated their 33rd wedding anniversary with just their children and grandchildren, a quieter affair than the grand party of years before, but no less meaningful. 9 grandchildren now, ranging from Emma at 17 to the latest addition, Thomas and Clara's 3rd child, a boy named Nathan after his grandfather. We have built quite a legacy, James observed, watching his own children play with their cousins in the yard. Your mother built it, Nathan said, his arm around Sarah's waist. I just had the good sense to write her a letter. We built it together, Sarah corrected, as she always did. Every bit of it. Partnership, remember. The First World War touched even Buffalo, though Wyoming was far from the fighting. James's oldest boy, Robert, enlisted in 1917 despite his parents' fears, determined to serve. Sarah prayed every night for her grandson's safe return, remembering Nathan's stories of violence and loss from his own younger days. When Robert came home in 1919, whole if changed by what he had seen, the family celebrated with grateful hearts. Sarah's health began to decline in her early 60s, arthritis making her hands stiff and painful. It hurt her to write the long letters she had once dashed off with ease, but she persisted, determined to maintain the connections that mattered. Nathan helped her when it got bad, taking dictation and writing in his own hand, their partnership adapting to new needs as it always had. Nathan developed heart trouble in his mid-60s, frightening Sarah with episodes of chest pain and breathlessness. The doctor prescribed rest and less stress, and Thomas took over completely at the stores. Nathan chafed at the restrictions but obeyed them, unwilling to risk leaving Sarah alone. They adapted to aging as they had adapted to everything else, with grace and humor and mutual support. Their children worried and fussed, but Sarah and Nathan reassured them that they had lived full, happy lives and had no regrets. In 1922, on a cool October evening 40 years after that first letter had arrived in Buffalo, Sarah and Nathan sat together in their bedroom, the one space that had been theirs alone through all the years of raising children and building a life. Sarah's hands hurt too much to hold a pen, so Nathan read to her from the latest letter from Catherine, full of news about a new exhibition and her children's accomplishments. When he finished, Sarah said quietly, "Will you read me one of your letters? From the beginning?" Nathan knew exactly what she meant. He retrieved the box from the closet, the one that held all the letters from their courtship, and selected one at random. It happened to be the third letter he had sent her, the one where he had first admitted his growing feelings. His voice, roughened with age but still strong, read his younger self's words about hope and loneliness and the unexpected joy of finding connection with a stranger. Words about falling in love with kindness expressed through careful handwriting. Words that had changed both their lives. When he finished, Sarah had tears on her cheeks. "I fell in love with you by the 12th page," she said, as she had told him many times over the years. "Did you know that?" "I did not know it then," Nathan said, setting the letter aside and taking her hand carefully, mindful of the arthritis. "But you told me on our wedding night, and I have treasured that knowledge every day since." "I have loved you for 40 years," Sarah said wonderingly. "More than half my life. You have been my constant, my partner, my great love. Whatever happens next, I want you to know that this life with you has been everything I ever wanted." "Sarah," Nathan said, and his voice cracked with emotion, "are you saying goodbye?" "No," she said, squeezing his hand as firmly as she could. "I am saying thank you. Thank you for writing that letter. Thank you for being brave enough to send it. Thank you for loving me, for building this life with me, for giving me children and grandchildren and 40 years of partnership. Thank you for everything." Nathan gathered her into his arms, holding her as gently as he had held their newborn children, and they stayed like that as the evening darkened into night. Two people who had found each other against all odds and built something lasting and true. They had several more good years together. Years of watching grandchildren graduate and marry. Years of quiet companionship and deep contentment. Sarah's health stabilized, and Nathan's heart condition was managed with medication and care. They celebrated their 45th anniversary in 1927, with 3 generations of family gathered around them. Proof of the love that had started with letters and grown into something magnificent. Catherine gave a toast that night, her artist's way with words bringing everyone to tears. "My parents' love story began before they met," she said. "It began with words on paper, with honesty and vulnerability, with the courage to reach across distance and connect with a stranger. That foundation of communication and trust has sustained them through 4.5 decades of marriage. They taught us that love is both feeling and choice, both passion and commitment, both romance and partnership. They showed us that a love story does not end with the wedding, that it continues and deepens with every passing year. We are all here because of the love they share, because a cowboy working the northern ranges had the courage to write a letter to a woman he had never met. Sarah and Nathan held hands through the toast, through the celebration that followed, through the goodbyes as children and grandchildren departed for their own homes. Later, alone together in the house that had held so much life and love, they prepared for bed with the comfortable routine of decades. "That was a good party," Nathan said, helping Sarah with the buttons she could no longer manage on her own. "It was," Sarah agreed. "We are blessed, Nathan." "So very blessed. We are," he said, kissing her forehead, "and it all started with a letter." "The best letter ever written," Sarah declared, making Nathan laugh. "I do not know about that," he said, "but it was the most important letter of my life, of our lives." They climbed into bed, and Nathan pulled Sarah close, her head resting on his chest where she could hear the steady beat of his heart, that heart that had struggled lately but was strong enough still to keep beating, keep loving, keep living. "I love you," Sarah whispered into the darkness. "Now and always." "I love you too," Nathan replied. "Forever and beyond." They fell asleep like that, entwined together as they had been for nearly half a century, two souls who had found each other through words on a page and built a love story for the ages. Sarah Whitmore Vance passed away peacefully in her sleep in the spring of 1930, at the age of 72, with Nathan holding her hand. She had lived a full, rich life, had loved deeply and been loved in return, had raised 3 good children and seen them happy and settled, had held 14 grandchildren and 4 great-grandchildren in her arms. She had built a successful business with her husband, had contributed to her community, had maintained friendships and connections across decades and distances. But her greatest achievement, the thing she was proudest of at the end, was the love she had shared with Nathan Vance. That love, begun with letters and sustained through 48 years of marriage, had been the foundation of everything else. It had shaped her life, given her purpose and joy, and made her into the woman she became. Nathan mourned her deeply but without bitterness, grateful for the years they had shared rather than angry about the time cut short. He lived for another 5 years, spending his time with family and tending Sarah's grave with fresh flowers every week. He died in the summer of 1935 at the age of 77 and was buried beside her in the Buffalo Cemetery with a headstone that read, "Nathan Vance, beloved husband, father, and grandfather. His letters found her heart before his face did. She loved him by page 12. Their children and grandchildren gathered for the funeral, mourning the loss but celebrating the life, the love, the legacy. James spoke about his parents' partnership, how they had shown him what marriage could be at its best. Catherine talked about their creativity and courage, how they had built something beautiful from nothing but hope and honesty. Thomas shared memories of his father's wisdom and his mother's kindness, qualities that had shaped him into the man he had become. But it was Emma, their oldest grandchild, now a woman of 32 with children of her own, who perhaps understood best what Sarah and Nathan had created. She had been researching family history and had asked to read the original letters, the correspondence that had started it all. "I read those letters," Emma said at Nathan's funeral, her voice carrying across the assembled mourners, "and I understood something I had never quite grasped before. My grandparents' love was not an accident or a stroke of luck. It was intentional and brave." Grandpa Nathan took a risk when he wrote to a woman he had never met, exposing his thoughts and feelings, making himself vulnerable. Grandma Sarah was equally brave in responding, in opening her heart to someone she knew only through words on paper. She paused, looking at the casket beside Sarah's grave. By the 12th page of his letters, Grandma had fallen in love. She told us that story many times, how she counted the pages and knew, absolutely knew, that this was the man she would marry. And she was right. They had 48 years together, years full of love and partnership, and the everyday magic of two people choosing each other again and again. Emma looked at her own children, at her cousins and their children, at the family that had grown from that first epistolary connection. "We exist because of letters," she said. "Because of courage and honesty and the willingness to believe that love can grow in unexpected places. That is the legacy they left us. Not just stories or businesses or houses, but the knowledge that real love is possible, that it takes work and bravery and commitment, and that it is worth every bit of effort." The funeral ended, and the family dispersed back to their various homes across Wyoming and beyond. But the story of Sarah and Nathan, the cowboy whose letters found her heart before his face did, lived on. Their children told it to their grandchildren. Their grandchildren told it to their own children. It became part of the family mythology, a reminder of where they came from and what was possible. And in Buffalo, Wyoming, in the cemetery on the hill overlooking the town that had been Sarah and Nathan's home for more than 50 years, two graves sat side by side. The wind that had carved patterns in winter snow still blew across the mountains. The seasons still turned, spring to summer to fall to winter and back again. But beneath the earth, together at last for eternity, rested two people who had loved each other truly and completely, who had built a life and a family on the foundation of letters and trust and courage. Their love story, which had begun with careful handwriting on yellowed paper, with words that bridged distance and connected strangers, had ended as all love stories must, with death and separation. But the love itself, the deep, abiding affection and partnership that had sustained them through nearly 5 decades together, that love did not end. It lived on in their children, in their grandchildren and great-grandchildren, in the stories told and retold, in the letters carefully preserved and occasionally read aloud, in the memory of two ordinary people who had created something extraordinary. Sarah Whitmore had loved Nathan Vance by the 12th page of his letters before she ever saw his face. And that love, born of words and nurtured through years of partnership, had proved to be the great adventure of both their lives. It had been tested and proven true. It had grown and deepened and matured into something solid and lasting. It had survived everything life could throw at it and emerged stronger, and in the end, that was enough. More than enough. It was everything. The letters themselves, carefully preserved through the generations, eventually made their way to the Wyoming State Museum, donated by Emma's daughter in the 1980s as an example of frontier courtship and communication. Scholars studied them for insights into life in territorial Wyoming. Romantics read them and sighed over the beauty of two souls finding each other across distance. But for the Vance family, those letters remained what they had always been: the foundation of a love story that spanned generations, the proof that sometimes the bravest thing you can do is reach out to a stranger, and that sometimes, if you are very lucky and very brave, that stranger writes back and changes your life forever. Nathan Vance's letters had found Sarah Whitmore's heart before his face did. She had loved him by page 12, and she had continued loving him for the rest of her life. He had loved her back with equal devotion, and together they had built something that lasted far beyond their individual lives. And that, in the end, was the whole story. A cowboy and a storekeeper's daughter, letters and love, a simple beginning that had bloomed into something rich and full and beautiful, a testament to the power of words and courage and two hearts brave enough to trust in the impossible.